Welcome to the third video in the Colored Pencil course, brought to you by thevirtualinstructor.com. In this video, we're going to take a look at the magic of burnishing. In this module, we'll take a look at the unique process known as burnishing, which allows for the creation of colored pencil drawings that resemble paintings. What is burnishing? Burnishing is a process of layering colored pencils in order to create a solid area of pigment. Burnishing is done to eradicate the texture produced by the drawing surface. Removing the rough texture will produce an image that more closely resembles a painting. How is burnishing achieved? Burnishing results from applying layers of colored pencil and then finishing the top layer with a heavily applied lighter pigment, colorless blender, or thinning agent. How is burnishing achieved? As each layer is applied, the amount of binder on the surface builds, making the surface waxy. When the last layer is applied, the binder of the pencil or thinning agent allows the pigment to be worked into the tooth of the paper, resulting in a solid area of color. Burnished areas can be created by layering with a white colored pencil, layering with a colorless blender, layering with another light color, like perhaps cream, or applying a medium or thinning agent, like perhaps turpenoid. Let's look at a few burnishing techniques. First, we'll create a small square where the colored pencil is not burnished, just to show the contrast in what will happen with the texture of the paper. In this case, I'll do 2 applications using directional lines with medium pressure. In the next box, I'll do the same thing by layering the pencil with a medium application. But this time, I'll layer over the top with a white colored pencil, applying heavy pressure. The application of white colored pencil causes the material underneath to be moved around on the surface, filling in the tooth of the paper, making a smooth application. Notice, however, that it does affect the value of the color, making it lighter. Now let's take a look at how burnishing can be achieved using a colorless blender. A colorless blender is a special pencil that includes just the binder inside of the shaft. There's no pigment whatsoever in the pencil at all. This allows just the waxy material that's inside of the pencil to do the work for you. A colorless blender does a great job of burnishing the color without sacrificing too much of the value. Lighter colors can also be used to burnish areas as well. For example, this cream is used to burnish the area of blue. It does change the value, but only slightly. Another technique that can be used is to use a medium or some type of thinning agent, like for example, turpenoid. For this example, I'm going to use turpenoid natural. This is a great material for thinning up the pigment and allowing it to be worked on the surface. I like to keep the turpenoid in a separate small glass container. This way I can keep a lid on it and only use a small amount at a time. I'm also going to be using a nylon brush. I like to use a nylon brush for this because the bristles are stiff enough to spring back, giving me lots of control. I'll take a medium amount of the thinner and work it into the areas where I've applied a medium application of colored pencil. Notice how the medium works the material into the tooth of the paper, creating a smooth application. Also notice how using the medium will intensify the color. The pigments become brighter when medium is used. Now Now let's take a look at how the varied techniques of burnishing can be used in a colored pencil drawing. In this case, we're going to do a drawing of 3 peppers on a table. This is a very simple drawing with simple shapes, so it's a good place to start. I'm going to first lightly sketch out the composition using only the contour lines with an HB pencil. Then I'll use a kneaded eraser to gently pat the surface, lightening up the graphite that I've already put down. I don't want the graphite to mix with the subsequent applications of colored pencil. Next, I'm going to start with a red, and I'm just going to very lightly apply the red in all the areas on the peppers themselves. I'm going to be very careful to avoid areas of highlight that I noticed in the photo reference. I'm going to let the white of the paper do a lot of the work for me in the areas of highlight. I want to be very careful that I plan out where these areas of intense highlight are. We should always begin the drawing with a very light application and slowly build up the applications of colored pencil on top. With each application, the color will become more representational and have more depth. I'll next go back and make some of the areas a bit more intense in areas of shadow in the photo reference. Now I'll use a bit of thinner and I'll start to paint over the top of the areas that I've already applied. This will loosen up the pigment on the surface and allow it to be spread. I can work the pigment into the drawing, or into the drawing surface rather, and move it around and control it just like I would a painting. You can choose how much you want to use the thinner. You can even let some of the areas of texture that are created by your initial marks show through. Here's a close-up of what the drawing looks like. You can see that the more thinner that's applied, the looser the pigment becomes and the easier it is spread on the surface. You can also see how much control you have using this method. The drying time is very quick for the turpenoid, and once it is dry, I can go back with a red-orange and start to intensify some of the areas of color on the peppers. In this case, I'm applying with medium pressure. I'll look for opportunities to make directional lines that will give more information about the form of the pepper. For example, I may apply the colored pencil using cross contour lines in areas. Now we can start to establish some of the shadowed areas. For this, I'm going to use a dark umber. Pay special attention to the shapes that happen in your photo reference or subject in order to establish where the shadowed areas are on your drawing. In this case, the light source is originating from the left side. This means that most of the shadows are going to exist on the right side of the objects and underneath them. I'm applying the colored pencil here with medium pressure. You'll start to notice that some of the colors underneath will start to mix with the subsequent applications. Here you can see close up what's happening here as I apply the brown to the surface. Notice how some of the colors underneath will still show through. Remember to take your time and be patient. Don't forget about the 5 do's for better hues. Remember that patience is one of them, and this process is going to take many layers in order to develop it into an image that looks realistic. Pay attention to the subtle changes in value that happen on your subject. In objects such as the peppers, there are very subtle changes of value. Getting these just right will go a long way into making your drawing look realistic. Now I'm going to go back with an indigo blue and intensify some of the shadows a bit further. Remember that by mixing the indigo blue and the dark umber, we can create a more natural black. With our shadows established, I'm going to go back now with the original red that we used. This time, however, I'm applying heavy pressure. I'm going to go right on top of some of the areas that I've established with the shadow. When you do this, you'll notice that the red causes some mixing with the colors that you've put underneath. This is exactly what you want to happen. The heavy application causes some of the pigment to enter into the tooth of the paper, creating some smooth areas already. Burnishing is already happening on the surface. We'll continue layering the red on all three of the peppers, covering them until we're satisfied with the intensity of the color. Next, I'm going to go back with a white colored pencil and establish those highlighted areas. I'm going to let some of the edges fade into the color of the pepper. This will create a more natural highlight. I'm also going to use the white in areas to create a more toned down area of highlight. There are some areas where the value is a little bit lighter on the pepper, and I'll use the white to achieve these areas. As we add the white on top of the red, some burnishing will occur. Of course, we are exploiting the fact that we're using white here by making these areas of value a little bit lighter. Remember, our light source is originating from the left side of the image. This means that the highlights and the lighter values are going to exist on the left side of the objects. I notice that there's an area on the middle pepper that needs to be darkened a bit. I'll use a dark umber for this. I'm going to apply light pressure here because I want some of the tonalities that I've already put down to show through. Next, I'm going to burnish some areas using the cream colored pencil. This will allow for burnishing that has a little bit of a warmer tonality, without sacrificing too much of the value. I'm applying heavy pressure to do this. Now I'll do some burnishing with the colorless blender. The colorless blender, if you'll recall, will allow me to work the colored pencil on the surface without sacrificing the value whatsoever. I'll use the colorless blender in almost every area on all three of the peppers. As you use the blender, you'll notice that the tooth almost completely disappears from the surface, creating a smooth and solid application of pigment. Now, more than likely there will be areas where you want to create a variety of texture, so I don't want all the areas to be smooth. So I'm going to go back with the original red and create a little bit of a textural change between the highlight in the foreground pepper. And then it's time to start adding color to the stems. I'm going to begin just like I did with the peppers by creating a light application of a darker green. I'm going to apply more pressure in areas where the value gets darker. I'm also going to use a lighter yellow-green to indicate some of the areas where the stem is lighter in value. The lighter yellow-green is more prevalent in the area of highlight on the stem. We can begin to establish some of the shadows in the stem using an indigo blue. We're going to start with the indigo blue as opposed to the dark umber because we want the shadows in this area to be cooler. On the peppers, we wanted the shadow to be a little bit warmer, that's why we started with the brown. Remember, we can control the black, we can control the color temperature of the black by the colors that we use. If we want the temperature of the black to be warmer, of course we'd use more of the dark umber, but in this case, since we want it to be cooler, we're going to use more of the indigo blue. Once I've established those areas, I am going to go back with the dark umber and darken up a few areas on the stem, but overall the shadow on the stem will remain cool. Next, I'm going to use a little bit of yellow to lighten up the area of highlight on the top of the stem. And now it's time to burnish these areas. This time I'll use the colorless blender. Once all the tiny specks of white left by the tooth of the paper are removed, we can turn our attention to the shadow. The cast shadow underneath the peppers will consist of indigo blue, dark umber, and violet. We'll begin with the indigo blue. The cast shadow will be more intense closer to the area where the pepper hits the surface. Initially though, we're going to put a light application of indigo blue. On the pepper in the foreground, there is an area of highlight that happens on the far right side. I want to leave enough space to create the contrast that needs to exist there. Next, I'll go back over the indigo blue with the violet. Here again, this is a light application. Now we can darken up the areas of cast shadow using the dark umber. Again, we're using light to medium pressure to accomplish this area of shadow. Once we've created this area of more natural shadow using the combination of colors, we can burnish these colors together using a colorless blender. To create a solid area of pigmentation, we'll need to put a lot of pressure on the colorless blender here as well. Once we've burnished the area of shadow, our drawing is complete. Here's what we discussed in this module. First, we looked at different ways to burnish colored pencils. These techniques included layering with a white colored pencil, layering with a colorless blender, and layering with a lighter pigmented pencil, like perhaps cream. We also looked at using a thinning agent. In our case, we used turpenoid. We also looked at how different burnishing techniques can be combined in a single drawing. In the next module in this series, we're going to take a look at value and how you can create a full range of value in your drawings.